Go on. Go. Do it. Go. You gotta do it. You gotta do it.
No, it was so funny last time. Now I can't get over it, and now no one gets to know. Welcome to Caleb Can't Read. I'm the very serious Jordan Rabel.
And I'm
with
Caleb
my
Terrence.
co-host,
Caleb.
the ever-pleasant co-host of Yours and Mine, Caleb Terrence. From where we last left off, Miguel de Cervantes learned the trade from his father on how to be a tax collector, but just not a totally moralist one. He skimmed a lot of money off the top.
Was what he was doing illegal?
Skimming money off the top
Is what he learned from his father on how to do while doing that illegal?
I mean,
Criminal. He taught him how to be a criminal, Jordan.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, he had good reasons to do what he did. He wanted to go on vacation to the New World.
Okay.
And his visa got denied, but he just kept stealing money. Well, anyway, he did take one of these jail cases and just get that really sent down like the Academy Award winning movie Suicide Squad with Will Smith. And he I'm never going to let you forget that. And he signed up for the Spanish Navy, went into a little war, got his fucking arm chopped, not off, but he couldn't use his left arm for the rest of his life, and 2 fucking gaping chest wounds from bullets that never seemed to fully heal. On his way back from touring with the Navy, he did get captured by pirates with his brother, and the pirates sent a ransom letter out to his parents, and his parents only saved his brother. And then he just kind of sat around until I believe it was the Trinitarians. They were a religious group that showed up years later, and they paid for the ransom of any Christian man. And I guess he was just Christian enough to basically just cut the mark there. But it didn't stop him from thieving. So he ended up in jail yet again. And now he's been a writer.
In jail where?
In Spain.
Oh, okay.
But he's been a writer for some time, but none of his work was actually good because, you see, more than anything else, he wanted to be a poet, but his poetry sucks. Everything in between the characters speaking was fucking fine, but then whenever they opened their mouth, everyone thought it was supposed to be humorous, and he didn't really like that. But now, with his last jail sentence, I think he was in there for something like 9 months, he came up with a story that he then sat down and wrote the first modern-day novel. Instead of releasing chapters at a time and selling them in the streets, he released the whole thing all at once, and it's a thick fucking book. So this is the tale of Don Quixote. And remember, this is a satire on the idea that action tales are going to make people dumber. Literally, you can be smart, you can sit down and watch a play about a knight fighting a dragon, and you will come out of there with a lower reading level. So, this is Don Quixote. The story of Don Quixote begins with a prologue by the author himself, Cervantes. Cervantes wants nothing more than to tell the world the very true and totally not fictional story of Don Quixote de la Mancha. He has these old records he's translating from Arabic that tell the tale. The only problem is, Cervantes knows that any good book must have allusions to the classics. Metaphors referencing the great poems of the day, quotes from famous plays, as any good story is. Thing is, Cervantes doesn't know any of this stuff. He fully admits it there in the prologue. When he tells his friend the issue he's having, his friend just says, "You think anyone really knows about all that shit? Just make it up as you go along. No one's going to know if you quote something right because nobody actually has all that shit memorized."
Yeah, there's no internet. Who's gonna fucking...
Yeah, well, that was the big thing with, nobles and shit, was pulling quotes out of their ass that just probably were wrong all the time. But it makes you sound learned. If they say they do, then they're full of shit. And it's this suggestion that's the reason why every so often in the book itself, you'll hear a conversation like, "Man, big waterfall. Just like the dragon from Orlando Furioso." Like he'll just spout random shit in there. And it's comedic. Now, our actual story begins with a man named Alonso Chiano, who lives in a castle, though not lavishly. Although he has a housekeeper and a niece to keep him company, he spends most of his time locked away in his room reading tales of knights and damsels in distress. He's actually managed to squander the family budget on these books of chivalry, leaving the castle in disrepair. Over the years, Chiano has become gaunt and old as he whiles away the hours reading his adventure stories despite the pleas from his niece to stop. Finally, by the time he's 50, Alonso Chiano realizes that he's a knight himself. Renaming himself Don Quixote de la Mancha, he dons an old set of family armor and a lance that's hung in the hallway, makes himself a cardboard helmet, and decides to set off in an adventure of his own.
This guy has way cooler mental breakdowns than me.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you could do it too, but I think the headline there is probably just going to end up being suicide by cop.
Yeah.
However, as a knight, he knows there are a few things one must have. One is a steed in which to ride into battle. Don Quixote finds the toughest horse in the stable, naming him Rocinante. But Don Quixote has become crazy over the years reading all these stories. So the horse in reality is an old, sickly nag. Next, Don Quixote must have a reason to travel. He does this not in the name of God, but in the name of love. He will set out to the world before him, spreading the name of the most beautiful woman who ever lived, a peasant woman in town named Dulcinea del Toboso. And while she doesn't know he exists, Don Quixote claims he has been in love with her since the day they supposedly met. He's beaten, actually, no, he's coming up pretty much at the same time as Dante, now that I think about it.
Yeah. A common creepy theme from the time period, huh?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So off he rides. The first landmark he comes across...
And then I saw her, and dude, that's not love. You just want to fuck her really, really, really bad. That is a completely different thing.
So off he rides regardless. The first landmark he comes across is an inn with 2 prostitutes in front, which he mistakes as a castle and 2 princesses. So of course he's just charming as hell to them, and the prostitutes take him inside and take off his heavy armor and put it on the cover of the inn's well.
8.
Pretty much, yeah. So they just place it on the open, or not on the opening, but on the cover to the well itself. And he's just sitting down with them and having dinner. But then he realizes, fuck, I forgot to actually get knighted. I can't say I'm a knight until the ceremony is complete.
I hope he didn't forget his money.
Actually, yes.
Uh-oh.
So, you're going ahead here. So he begs the lord of the castle, the innkeeper, to knight him. And the guy's like, yeah, I'll do it for money. But Don Quixote tells him he doesn't carry cash. So the innkeeper's like, fuck.
Sir, unlike the prostitutes, I will do literally anything for your money.
He's just like, fuck, all right, I hereby knight you, whatever. Just carry cash with you from now on, yeah? And Don Quixote takes this as a mission. So Don Quixote is finally knighted and feels fucking invincible. But suddenly, there's some
Night
other...
of the Motel 8.
I think that would be great, actually. We ought to just go into the Pepper Tree Inn a couple exits down from here and just, like, run in there. We are knights! Or probably worse, yeah, we should
just random businesses. Just pull the mask off entirely on capitalism.
Yeah. We are patriots! Oh, fuck, call the cops. But suddenly there's some other patrons of the inn trying to remove his armor from the top of the well to get to the water for their horses. Don Quixote, however, believes they're trying to steal his armor. Invoking his love, Dulcinea del Toboso's name, he grabs his lance and knocks one guy unconscious and cracks open the head of the other guy. Because this is not a fantasy novel and these are just regular people. He is an actual man with a real lance cracking open heads. So everyone at the inn is just like, Jesus Christ! And they quickly
the best
kick
part
him
is
out.
like he's not like stabbing them with the lance. He's just
he's just smacking them on the side of
probably just like picks up the pointy end and then bludgeons them with the handle. It's like,
I mean, essentially, yeah. and everyone's just everyone's just freaking the fuck out. They're just like, holy fuck! Like that's like going to like a Comic-Con and like telling people like, yeah, I'm more Deadpool than anyone else, and they're like, haha, yeah, me too, man.
Fleeing
no,
the scene
this is a real gun. Like, oh fuck.
Fleeing the scene on a geriatric horse that goes diagonally. Just like...
Mobility nag. On his way home to grab cash like the good Lord at the inn told him to, Don Quixote comes upon a farm boy tied up to a tree and being whipped by a farmer. Not sexually. Don Quixote...
Okay, never mind. I'm not going there.
You think I don't do it in public? Don Quixote, very obviously armed and dressed in armor, rides up and asks what's going on. The farmer's like, he's just not doing too well in his duties, so I'm punishing him. On you go. But the boy is like, bullshit, he hasn't fucking paid me, and when I complained, he started torturing me. Well, Don Quixote takes the boy's side, tells the farmer that as a knight, he ought to know better and should pay the boy. And the farmer's like, right, I am a knight. And you're correct, good sir. I shall pay the boy and stop beating him. On you go. And Don Quixote just rides off thinking he's helped out. But of course, as soon as he's out of earshot, the farmer just whips the kid even harder. Soon, Don Quixote comes across some traveling merchants. What?
Okay. All right. Cool.
What?
No. We just kind of
issue resolved.
That shit just seemed kind of weird and wild, but okay. I guess we're going on to wilder shit. Otherwise, we would have dwelled longer on it.
Honestly, the entire novel itself is what you would call episodic. There's a lot of shit that they encounter that will never come back again. It's like you could open any chapter to it, just read that one chapter, and it's just a good Always Sunny type of thing going on. Honestly. So, yeah, he comes across some traveling merchants, just a couple of guys towing their shit to the next town. But Don Quixote forces them to stop and pledge their allegiance to Dulcinea del Toboso and say that she is the prettiest woman in the world. What?
Does it go into detail about how he forces them?
Yeah, he's there with a lance and they're not.
Well, do they have, like, I don't know, like a gun? Like
No. He pretty much just says, he says it always in very, like, romantic language where he's like, stop, you shall not pass unless you invoke Dulcinea del Toboso's name. And they're just like, why? And he's,
I invoke Dulcinea del Toboso's name.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And one guy basically just tells him, like, fuck you and whatever bitch you're talking about. And angrily, Don Quixote charges to attack them. But slowly, because he's on Rocinante, the sickly horse. And when the horse stumbles and throws Don Quixote off, the merchants get off their horses and beat the ever-loving shit out of him until he's unconscious.
Well, yeah, he's got a lance. Fuck him.
Yeah, he tried. It wasn't a poor attempt, but he still tried to attack these men.
Also, he's in armor. How many opportunities are you going to get to, like, full force stomp somebody without killing him? You know what I mean? Like, really fucking let him have
it. The next day, Don Quixote is found on the side of the road by a guy making his way to town. When he checks if Don Quixote is still alive, he finds him breathing, but speaking a whole lot of nonsense.
A suit of armor is sick. Oh, god damn.
Guy in it is not dead yet. Fuck. The guy gets the gist of where he's from, though, from all of him just spouting out bullshit, and he elects to take him back home. And of course, when he does, the Quijano household is just beside themselves. While Don Quixote is getting treatment in his room, his niece and housekeeper call upon a priest to see what can be done about his mind. In entering his study, they find a shit ton of books about knights and chivalry, so clearly the books have got to go. And as the priest is picking through the books, he's like...
the seed has been planted.
Yeah. And the priest is just like, I get that we've got to burn the bad ones, but maybe if we left the poetry behind, then he'll become a more learned man? And the niece is like, no, because then he'll want to become a poet. And there's nothing worse than a poet. And he's like, you're right. Burn the poetry too. But what I think is funny about this part is that the priest picks up a copy of La Galatea by Cervantes. And he's like, that guy never did write a sequel like he said he would. And the niece is like, is it any good? And he's like, Cervantes is more of an ideas guy than an actual writer. Meta. So the priest and the niece burn the books, but unfortunately for them, Don Quixote wakes up from his recovery to see his library practically on fire. And he's like, what the fuck happened? And his niece, trying to come up with something quick to appease him, is like, oh, it was an evil wizard who came in with a dragon and burned all your books. Woo!
I feel like that's kind of working backwards.
Right,
there.
You would think. But instead of Don Quixote just accepting fate, he's like, that motherfucker, I'm going to kill him. And he grabs his gear.
I'm going to kill that fucking dragon. Like,
Yeah.
Wait, they didn't get rid of his gear?
No.
They didn't want him to go on a fucking rampage thinking he was a knight, so they just burned the books and they just left the fucking armor and lance and shit. Like,
One of those good old-fashioned indoor fires.
that would be like if I had a child and if he went on a killing spree with a gun and then I just kept the fucking gun in the house and then was like, yeah, burn the video games.
You just
like,
put it on top of the fridge, look at him, go, no.
Don't.
No.
Don't.
So Don Quixote grabs his gear and, fighting off his niece, the housekeeper, and the priest, he rides off, believing he now has an arch enemy to defeat. But before he goes too far, Don Quixote comes to the home of a farmer named Sancho Panza. A short,
He still has
fat-
the horse?
Yeah. What's wrong with him having a horse?
No, it's just...
You got to get around town somehow.
Is it the same horse?
Yeah, it is.
Wow, okay.
Somehow. It's still alive.
All right.
Sancho Panza is a short, fat, poor little man. Don Quixote wants to adopt him as his squire, with the promise that he shall govern an island as soon as they discover it. Against the better judgments of Sancho Panza's family, and fully believing that Don Quixote is a knight, Sancho Panza rides beside Don Quixote on his donkey, ready for adventure. Their adventure starts, most famously, with Don Quixote seeing a group of giants on a hill, spinning their arms as if ready to attack.
As giants do.
Oh, I'm gonna do it. Oh. These are, of course, windmills. Don Quixote rushes in with his lance full charge, prepared to kill. But as he stabs a windmill's sail, Don Quixote is lifted up and thrown to the ground. He believes he's just had the shit kicked out of him by the giant, and regardless of Sancho Panza's rebuttal that they are indeed windmills, Don Quixote tells him that they were giants, but that the evil wizard had just enchanted them into windmills at the last second.
Ah.
Yeah.
I almost lost faith in you.
This is how a lot of people deal with their politicians, like, yeah, I voted for him. Look, he's going to be better. He didn't mean to say that.
I wish I could deal with life like that. It'd be really nice.
They're just genital pimples, okay? It's fine.
No. They're fine. They're not genital pimples. An evil wizard has convinced you that...
With his lance broken upon his fall, Don Quixote now wields a mighty stick in its place. Now, Don Quixote and Sancho come upon a caravan the next day. There's a woman in a carriage and 2 monks on horseback being escorted by a Moorish guide. Do you know what a Moor is? They use it a lot in like old books and shit, but basically it's just like originally it was just meant to mean like a Middle Eastern Muslim guy. Over time it also became a name for just a black person. So I don't know in what regard this is, but probably just a Muslim dude from the Middle East.
Dude.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Well, Don Quixote, of course, believes the woman in the carriage to be a kidnapped princess, and the monks and the Moor her captors. So Don Quixote tells them to unhand the girl, and the monks and the guide, thinking it's a joke, naturally laugh. While they're distracted, Don Quixote rides up to one of the monks and knocks him off his horse. Meanwhile, Sancho sneaks around to the luggage on the back of the carriage and just starts ransacking shit. He's just straight up thieving stuff like, all right. So the monks run off scared, but the Moor, understandably upset, tells Don Quixote to fight him. And the lady in the carriage is like, can we please just leave? This guy's fucking crazy. And the guide is like, you stay out of this. So Don Quixote tells the Moor to don his helmet and fight him like a true knight. And the Moor is like, I don't have a fucking helmet. Fight me. And he's like, no, it would be ungentlemanly.
I don't have a helmet. We have muskets now. We don't fucking do that. This is...
So the Moor grabs a pillow out of the carriage and puts it on his hair, head like, there, good? And Don Quixote accepts the fight. Remember, he has a stick and this guy has a real-life sword. So when they charge at each other, Don Quixote manages to smack the guy on the head with the stick and give him a concussion, while the Moor splits Don Quixote's cardboard helmet in half and cracks his skull.
Got him.
But as Don Quixote bleeds...
Bet you carry your helmet next time, huh? Won't you? You're going to get beaten by some random crazy jack-off with a stick. No, you pack your fucking helmet, sir.
But as Don Quixote bleeds profusely from his head, he is victorious, as the Moor has been knocked unconscious and thrown from his horse. Don Quixote rides to the Moor, lifts up his stick for the killing blow, and That's it. The story cuts off. Cervantes says the records about what happens next are lost. Because remember, he's translating all of this from factual record. Wink. However,
I'll accept it.
as Cervantes himself, and he's telling this in the novel, walks the streets during a festival, he sees a boy selling old Arabic pamphlets on the street. He asks the boy what the papers are of, and the kid says he doesn't know. So he's like, all right, well, read one. And the kid doesn't get very
I don't know, man. I can't read.
The kid doesn't get very far before coming across the name Dulcinea. Cervantes quickly has the boy read about who this Dulcinea might be, as it may be the same Dulcinea from the life of Don Quixote. Sure enough, when Cervantes hears that this Dulcinea in question is, quote, the best hand at salting pork of any woman in all La Mancha, he knows he has the continuation of his story. He buys up the papers from the boy and continues his translation back home. She has the greatest arm hair of any woman in town.
Very specific.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a very specific man.
I got a type. Turns out, after Don Quixote raised...
Best pork salter. Oh, fuck.
After he raised his mighty stick, he smacked the Moor in the face, splitting the poor guy's ear. The woman in the carriage rushes up to him and looks at Don Quixote like, what the fuck do you even want? And Don Quixote says that as they have lost in battle, they must return to Dulcinea del Toboso in La Mancha. Tell her of his bravery. You should know her by their fine pork salting skills. They agree so long as he goes away, and Don Quixote and Sancho just ride off. Sancho is worried about getting arrested for assault, but Don Quixote tells him not to worry, as knights and squires are allowed to cause violence in search of justice. It's the law. So basically, the stories in Don Quixote are all like this, very slapstick.
It's all slapstick buddy cop.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
But my favorite one is when Don Quixote and Sancho go to an inn. Again, Don Quixote mistakes this for a castle. Well, the inn is full up, so they'll have to sleep in these beds. They're essentially like, they're in a barn where the livestock in the farmhand sleep. Like, with the inn all full, you guys can go to the fucking manger. Well, the innkeeper's ugly hunchback servant girl and the farmhand are secretly lovers. And the servant girl doesn't know that they're...
okay, I got a... You said hunchback girl?
Yeah. Oh, that drew your interest.
Hunchback girl and what?
And the farmhand. Okay. The farmhand stays in like the fucking little manger with, you know, Sancho and Don Quixote. And then the innkeeper's hunchback servant girl, she and the farm boy are shacking up.
Pussy's scarce around these parts.
And well, she doesn't know that the other two are in there. So late at night, she sneaks in looking for her lover. And Don Quixote, while he's lying in bed, grabs the ugly chick's hand and thinks that she's a princess and tells her all these lovely things. And she freaks out, which of course wakes up the farmhand, who thinks Don Quixote is attacking her. So he runs over and just starts beating the fucking shit out of him. Meanwhile, the girl hears the innkeeper coming from down the stairs to the manger. So she quickly hides in what she thinks is an unoccupied bed, but it's actually where Sancho is sleeping. And Sancho gets awakened by the noise and the movement, so he looks under his blanket and sees this ugly girl, and he thinks he's having a nightmare, so he just starts punching her in the face. And of course, the innkeeper comes in, sees Sancho attacking the servant girl.
It's written so that she was so ugly when he awoke to it. He
thought it was a nightmare.
A fucking nightmare. That's how it's written.
So he just starts punching her in the fucking face.
That's fucking horrible.
And then when the innkeeper comes in, he sees Sancho just beating her. And so he comes over and just starts punching him in the face. So everyone's just getting punched in the fucking face. This is brilliant writing.
And this hunchback servant girl is just...
And there are several misadventures like this. You know, like fantasy stories always talk about magic potions and shit. So Don Quixote and Sancho try to make a potion of their own and drink it, thinking it'll heal their wounds from like their last misadventure. But all they get is sick from it. Like after Don Quixote gets his teeth knocked out from something, Sancho's like, here, let me look at your mouth, see how many teeth you're missing. And while he's looking in, Don Quixote just vomits all over Sancho. And then Sancho gets sick and throws up on Don Quixote, so they're just spewing back and forth. This is high comedy in 1605, okay?
It's pretty funny now as well.
Right? It's one of my favorite books. If you're able to get past the Old English, it's very fucking funny. Well, eventually, Don Quixote gets a new helmet. It's actually a wash basin belonging to a barber he kind of accidentally robs, but he believes it's a magic helmet. At one point, Don Quixote decides to meditate alone in the woods. During this, he sends Sancho to deliver a love letter to Dulcinea del Toboso. But before Sancho leaves, he turns to look at Don Quixote, who has removed his pants and is doing a headstand in the wash basin, and Sancho's just like,
You liar.
all right. And then he goes, I'm not lying. This is all part of it. He just like turns around for a second, and next thing he knows, he's just like half naked and doing a headstand. He's just like,
What are you doing? Checking to see if it's magic, idiot.
Well, instead of heading to Dulcinea, whom Sancho has no idea what she looks like, he arrives at an inn in the town Don Quixote is from and comes to be recognized by the priest who saw him ride off with Don Quixote and the barber that Don Quixote fucking robbed. The priest wants to get Don Quixote back home, and Sancho, thinking that the sooner the adventure ends, the sooner he'll get his island, agrees to help the priest and the barber. Well, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort on their part. They pretty much just go back to the woods and lie to him about needing him at a different castle. So they get Don Quixote back to the inn and put him up in the attic where he can't bother anybody for the night. But soon enough, what looks like blood just starts leaking through the fucking ceiling.
I was gonna say I wouldn't know. Why would they assume just no?
Look, play with this. I think it's a quote from a comic book, Quantum and Woody. Just, here's a bottle of hooch and a loaded gun. Just play with them until you're lying quietly from one or the other. Turns out Don Quixote found these lamb hide skins of wine hanging up on the wall, like these leather sacks of wine, and of course believes them to be enemy soldiers. So Don Quixote was just cutting them down and watching them bleed. The innkeeper's not happy and tired of his shit, so Don Quixote is tied to Rocinante outside for the night. Just tie him up with the fucking dogs. The police eventually show up to the inn and talk to the owner like, hey, that guy you have tied up outside is actually wanted for a multitude of crimes. You gotta hand him over. And everyone at the inn at this point has seen Don Quixote's craziness firsthand. So they start defending him like, no, look, he's fucking insane. We promise we'll get him home. Just give us a fucking minute. So the cops...
Look, we know that the insanity has caused, murder. But...
He hasn't killed anyone.
He's killed a lot of people.
Maybe. But, they don't say it outright.
Hasn't he killed, at least 2 people?
No. He just, he hits them with sticks or beats the shit out of them with the lance, but they're still alive.
Like Batman?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're using the Batman rule for this.
Batman rules. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't kill, but we...
We are going to make them pay for capitalist medication.
But he might need to have permanent supervision for the rest of his life.
Oh, yeah. A lot of these people are committing suicide afterwards, for sure, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You think Batman's fucking... He's just beating up, hungry dads and shit?
No. I didn't kill those criminals. I just dismantled their bodies that they used to be violent people for their career, and now I'm not sure what they're going to do.
He's going to walk with a very painful limp for the rest of his life, and... he doesn't have health insurance.
Yeah, so. That arm don't work no more.
So the cops leave, and Don Quixote gets told by one of the patrons of the inn that they're going to enchant him and send him home with magic. He believes this and lets the guy do it, and the guy's just like, okay, for the magic to work, you need to get in this fucking cage. So the priest and the barber and Sancho are escorting the cart that's carrying Don Quixote back home. And remember, Sancho believes in Don Quixote being a knight 99%. So Sancho's like, Sir Quixote, you're not being enchanted. You're in a fucking cage. They're just taking you back home. And Don Quixote's like, nonsense. Enchantments are just a lot slower these days than they used to be. Sancho's like, well, have you got to take a piss? I was like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. What of it? And Sancho's like, if you were under a magic enchantment, you wouldn't need to piss. And this is completely made up by Sancho.
No, that links up.
Just to get him out of the fucking cage. But for whatever reason, Don Quixote buys it anyway. He's just like, yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. So when the cart pulls over, the priest lets Don Quixote out of his cage for lunch, and Don Quixote plans on making a break for it. But he sees some religious folks carrying a statue of the Virgin Mary, praying for rain. And of course, he believes it to be a group of men kidnapping some damsel. So instead of running away to escape his capture, Don Quixote just runs up to these religious guys and starts wailing on them, I mean, these are like priests. And of course, he gets his ass kicked. He's completely outnumbered. When Sancho pulls him up off the ground, he's like, I'm done. I want to go home now. Sancho's he's just like, you sure?
Did they beat him sane?
No, he's giving up. He's just
momentarily.
He's just like, I want to go home. He's like, yeah, I can't adventure until my luck turns around, basically. So Don Quixote and Sancho Panza ride back to his home in La Mancha voluntarily, where Cervantes promises there'd be a return to the Knight's Tale as soon as he translates more of the files he's found. The end. The book was an immediate success. So much so that copies became bootlegged in Portugal, Italy, and all throughout Spain. And actually, Cervantes took a major financial hit because of this. But even so, the number of legitimate copies being sold still kept Cervantes afloat in a career that, if you'll recall, was largely regarded as not lucrative. But despite its popularity, it was still regarded as a pretty novice novel, which is totally fair. There are a lot of inconsistencies in the book. Drafts where different shit happened got accidentally blended together in the final printing.
Yeah, but that shit doesn't really matter if it's a comedy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no.
I mean,
everybody's
honestly,
there to fucking laugh. They're not there to.
Yeah, until I was actually researching this, I was like, it is? Like,
yeah.
So, for instance, Sancho will have his donkey one moment, then in the next chapter complain about how it got stolen, although nothing about this was mentioned before, and then by the next chapter, the donkey's back again. But to a lot of people, it didn't matter because Cervantes' writing is entertaining as hell. Yes, it is very slapstick, but there are stories told by travelers that our two heroes meet that ended up very famous in their own right. Don Quixote was extremely influential to everybody that picked it up. As a matter of fact, there's a play by William Shakespeare in his last year as an active playwright in 1613 called The History of Cardenio that has since then been unfortunately lost, which a lot of people speculate was a retelling of one of the tales in Don Quixote about a couple of star-crossed lovers. But all we can do is speculate about that. My favorite of these little side quest traveler tales is when there's a funeral for a sheep herder that Don Quixote and Sancho Panza come across, and they ask, how did he die? And they tell this long story of a woman sheep herder named Marcella, whose beauty causes men to die as she rejects their love. This young man here committed suicide after being the most recent rejection. It's a very Greek tale, and Cervantes is obviously alluding to older works with it. But then Marcella herself shows up to the funeral and tells everyone, hey, fuck you. It's not my fault I'm hot. And your friend sucks for feeling friend-zoned when I wanted nothing to do with him. Respect women and quit being such fucking neckbeards about it before just walking off into the woods. And everyone's just kind of embarrassed.
Did anybody ask her out? Did anybody ask her out? All right, no, we're good.
You know what? I agree with her. I'm going to like all of her requests, and I'm just, oh, man.
Yeah.
I bet I'm the one. The actual first editions of Don Quixote were shipped to New Spain in the Americas. Unfortunately, the boat sank on the way there near Havana, and of the 400 first copies, only 70 of those would make it to South America, and to this day only 12 exist. In 1606, a year after the release of Don Quixote, Cervantes finally makes it back to his home of Madrid at the age of 59, where he'll stay for the rest of his life. He also starts going by the name Saavedra, which was what his captors, the pirate captors, called him while he was enslaved in Algeria, if you'll remember, single-handed. I mean, that's what the name Saavedra means. Anyway.
Hey, wait, I don't understand. Is there anything else you can tell me about this?
About which part?
Never mind, go on.
With the release of Don Quixote, Cervantes became a sensation overnight. And at first, the book was correctly labeled as a comedy, yet over the course of the centuries would be rebranded by different groups. For instance, after the French Revolution, the French largely looked at the novel as a brilliant satire of nobles. Like, it's not that Don Quixote was turned insane by this stupid idea that books of chivalry could do this to you in Spain in the 17th century. Instead, it was actually about how all nobles are out of touch with reality.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
I'm a bit biased.
And I get that, but like, we know the context in which it was written. We always have. Changing it later to say, like, this is what it's actually about, stupid.
No.
Or in the 19th century, Don Quixote became a story of doing what's right regardless of how society may view you.
Yeah, I don't like that read of it.
Yeah, no.
That don't make no sense.
And it somehow became seen as more of a drama.
What the fuck are you doing to that more? Oh, just doing what's right? Don't worry about
They're
it.
puking on each other for what's right. Yeah. And it somehow became seen as more of a drama, even though there is an entire scene of two men swapping vomit. Like it's just. But to Cervantes, the book was always meant to be a joke. It's fucking funny. Unfortunately, as quick as his stardom came, Cervantes' writing started slowing down due to a few issues in his family. In 1609, sickness swept through the Cervantes family. Siblings were dropping in like a 6-month span. A brother, a couple of sisters, his mom. And because of this, Cervantes gets religious. Because, of course, he sees what's happening to his family and believes it to be God's retribution for his life not well lived. But whereas his father had a spending habit...
That is a weird take.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he was just... everyone grieves different? I don't know.
This must have something to do with me.
But whereas his father had a spending habit, Miguel straight up stole federal funds. So feeling like he'd be the next in his family to go, Cervantes joins the Third Order of St. Francis, where his sister Magdalena and I believe his mom at one point was ordained. Now in 1613, Cervantes releases the Novelas Ejemplares, meaning exemplary novels, a series of 12 short stories he'd been working on in his spare time since practically the time he first got released from the fucking pirates. And just like in Don Quixote, there's a story in here that makes fun of the fact that there are even quote-unquote rules to writing to begin with. Seriously, fantasy stories aside, no one could write a story not grounded in reality. You had to start your tale a certain way. You had to have your dialogue framed in a particular manner. People genuinely had guidelines when it came to what and how stories could be told. And Cervantes thought having rules for writing at all was fucking stupid. Because of course it is. That's not how you get creative, by staying in the fucking lines. So one story in the Novelas Ejemplares is called Dialogue of the Dogs, where this guy is in a hospital and dying of fucking syphilis, and he listens out his window at night to two stray dogs and carrying on a fully human conversation about their lives. And one of the dogs even starts telling his story to the other dog, and the other dog is like, "You can't start a story that way. It's not in the rules. You have to tell a lesson that you'll get back to by the end of the story, or it doesn't fucking count." Now, over the course of the next 10 years, since Don Quixote was released, it never loses popularity. And people keep asking Cervantes, "Hey, you said there'd be more adventures for Don Quixote and Sancho. Is it going to happen?" And like any good writer, Cervantes just tells people it'll happen eventually, but never actually does anything about it. But because of one man, whose identity to this day we've never learned, but went by the pseudonym of Alonso Fernandez de Avellaneda.
Give me a look.
Alonso. Oh, yeah. Because of your,
Come on,
yeah.
Yeah.
Your Puerto Rican side.
That
there it is.
does not. Nope. Raised by white people. Okay. Dances with Whitey over here. Alonso Fernandez de
Alonso. We will call him Alonso. Because of him, we have a sequel to Don Quixote. From the first modern-day novel, this guy Alonso wrote and mass-produced perhaps the first ever unofficial sequel to a non-religious work, a book called Second Volume of the Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote de la Mancha, hit the streets around 1613. Now, were people actually fooled into thinking this was a real continuation to Don Quixote? No. But again, people could not get enough of the character even 10 years later.
It is.
Huh?
The first, larger fanfic?
Yeah.
Oh,
a
fuck.
very unofficial sequel.
Is
So
there
he's
any way
making
for us to go
money.
back in time and stop it? to cut it out at the root?
No, because without this guy, we wouldn't have the second part to Don Quixote, which
But is it
great.
fan fiction? Are you willing to sacrifice that to make it stop?
I'm gonna be real with you. I bought the this unofficial sequel thing because I was like, well, I love Don Quixote, so this would be great actually. I did not get very far. It's not good.
It's because it's fan fiction.
It's very fucking bad. I hear that there have been good fan fictions, but I'm not willing to admit which ones they are, or I've never read any. So people start buying. Don't look at me like that. So people start buying up this unauthorized sequel, and it's just not good. Like I haven't got
worse than Weebs.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Like no, it's just the humor is like nothing more than like calling people fat and shit. Like it's not like it's less slapstick and more
Weird,
just
you don't think that's funny?
Like they're not like, oh, like, hey,
so
look at
you think
who
you would think calling someone fat as a joke would be unsophisticated then?
I think if they I think it it's just not clever.
Oh. Okay. You carry any bias there.
And I know the actual first part
Odd you just chose that as an
by
example.
Cervantes was full of fart jokes and slapstick, but this is still somehow worse. Anyway, some people believe that Cervantes may never have actually completed the second part of Don Quixote had this not come out because, boy, let me tell you, guy was pissed. He could not let this be the final word to his career. So 2 years later, Don Quixote Part 2 hits the streets in 1615. Cervantes opens the second part of Don Quixote saying that he's been sent back out into the world to, quote, purge the disgust and nausea caused by another Don Quixote who has been running around the world masquerading as the second part. He also suggests that if anyone should happen to know the true identity of Alonso and happen to run into him, to just beat the ever-loving fuck out of him.
Oh.
Which,
on site.
Just on site, kill this man. Anyway, Don Quixote has been resting for several years, practically still in bed from where we last left him. And the priest believes that maybe Don Quixote, over time, has been cured. To test this theory, the priest brings up knighthood for the first time in 10 years. And suddenly, from seeming like a regular sickly old man, Don Quixote jumps out of bed as if he's just remembered that he's on a quest for glory.
I just remembered I was fucking Don Quixote.
Don Quixote meets up with Sancho again, and Sancho tells him they're famous. Their exploits have been talked about so much, there are actually a couple of books on his adventures thus far. The first book is great, and has been well received by critics and the public alike. But the second book, written by some asshole named Alonso, is dog shit. So Don Quixote, wanting to know more about these books, calls up a scholar in town named Samson to bring the novels to him so he can see what they're all about. And Samson tells him, yeah, the first book is really good, although there's a bunch of stories in there that don't have anything to do with you, and it's just people swapping stories, but they're pretty good too, I guess. Also, it's really weird how there's this unexplained inconsistency where Sancho's donkey is like sometimes missing, and then in other chapters he's not. And Sancho's like, oh, actually, I can explain that. You see, what happened was... But then Sancho gets a tummy ache and has to leave to go take a shit. Now, Don Quixote reads both books and concludes that while the first book by Cervantes is far superior a novel, it's still full of lies. As he stated to Sancho in the book, he did fight giants. It's just that they became enchanted by an evil wizard to turn into windmills. This fucking guy is making him look like an idiot. Meanwhile, Don Quixote has nothing but spite for the fake second novel. When Sancho Panza asks if they should seek glory at a jousting festival in Saragossa, Don Quixote says, no, because that fake novel said I would, so now I'm not going to do it. You're all being punished.
Good save, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Good save.
Did you have a story set up for the jousting? Yeah, you don't get to know about it.
No, I totally did, and I could totally beat all those dudes.
My uncle actually gave me the PS6, and you guys just can't see it. And as the group discusses how all of the inconsistencies of the first novel are total bullshit, Sancho goes to tell his wife that he's off on another adventure, calling her by a completely different name than what she was called in the first book. So I think it's a little self-dig at himself, probably. Now, before they begin their adventure, Don Quixote hopes for a blessing from his beloved Dulcinea del Toboso, and tells Sancho to go fetch her as he watches. Now, this is an issue because even though Sancho said he delivered his letter to her in the first part, he never did. If you'll remember, he's never even fucking seen her before. But knowing that his sire is at least a little mad, Sancho sees 3 girls on horseback and says,
Oh, cool.
"Look,
Yeah,
sir."
no, I was thinking. Yeah.
It's Dulcinea and a couple of her fair maidens, hoping that Don Quixote will just pick one to be Dulcinea. But instead he's like, "I don't see her. That's just 3 peasant girls." But Sancho throws himself down in front of the ugliest one, described as having 7 or 8 9-inch hairs protruding from her mole.
Dude, this guy is kind of rough with that. After the humpback chick and now this.
Look, man, there's ugly chicks out there. What are you going to do?
I know.
And he says, "Sir, surely you recognize that she's enchanted herself so that she isn't noticed by her beauty." And he's like, "Oh, of course." So even though the girl won't talk to them, he sees this as good as a blessing of any kind, and they just ride away. Not far into their travels, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza come across another knight and squire. This guy calls himself the Knight of the Wood. And soon, they decide to set up camp together and swap tales of knighthood and chivalry over the fire. Sancho and the other squire manage to get along pretty well. They just get shit-faced on wine and talk about how they're going to be rich someday. But as the 2 knights talk of their adventures, the Knight of the Wood says that one of his greatest accomplishments was how he single-handedly defeated the great Don Quixote de la Mancha. And of course, Don Quixote rises up and says, "The fuck you did? That's me. Whoever you fought was an imposter." And the Knight of the Wood says, "Well, no better way to stake my claim than to kick your ass at jousting right now." And Sancho and the other squire are just like, what do we do in
They're
this
just
situation?
drunk in the woods having a good time, and they turn around and they're both like charging at each other on horseback, and they're like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, so they just start questioning each other, like, are we also supposed to fight? Like, I don't know what to do. And surprisingly, in their joust, Don Quixote actually wins. This is maybe the first actual accomplishment that like he does at something. And as he peels off the helmet of the Knight of the Wood, it's revealed that it's Samson, the guy from town they borrowed the books from. And he says he's been told by the priest in town to defeat Don Quixote so that he'll realize he's not cut out for this and go home.
It's not. Oh, well.
What?
I don't know. I can't comment on this, and because it's supposed to be funny and dumb.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
I'm supposed to bring the funny and dumb. It's already funny and dumb. Why am I here?
No, I mean, it kind of makes sense, though, where it's like, I mean, maybe, I don't know. I mean, because he's always been
You would send an actual fucking dude who could joust to put him in his place. You wouldn't send a
probably.
random jack-off.
I think random jackoff might have just been the youngest guy in village, honestly. Like, I don't know. But, like, he's been defeated before, and I feel like he just kind of always, like, goes around it somehow by, like, just saying, like, no, I wasn't.
Well, they weren't following the rules of chivalry.
Mm-hmm. So, Sancho believes him about Samson telling him that the priest is up to no good with this. Don Quixote is like, "Don't listen to him, Sancho. It's just another enchantment to make him look like Samson. Just like how Dulcinea was made to look like a peasant woman, remember?" And Sancho, who half believes him, is like, "Fuck, maybe that was Dulcinea." He starts to kind of lose it himself.
Is this still gaslighting if the other person's fucking insane?
I don't know.
Like, no, I feel like the intent is the...
Well, he doesn't know what to think anymore. He's just like, I mean, but he's kind of driven insane by somebody else who believes in this shit, so I don't know. I mean, I don't think cult leaders are gaslighting, necessarily. Like, they are insane, and they're getting other people to just believe they're insane.
Well, I mean, they must believe, like, somewhere deep... They must know, like, somewhere deep down they're full of
Oh, yeah,
shit.
most of them do, yeah.
And they've cashed out all their fucking bets, anything else they can fucking do in life to be important, and now...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, Don Quixote and Sancho come across a caravan that has 2 lions in a cage. And when Don Quixote asks what's up, the guys leading the caravan say they've captured a couple of lions to take to the king upon his request. Don Quixote's like, "I'ma fight him." And actually, the guys in the caravan are like, "Fuck yeah, you will." So they open up the cage, and Don Quixote charges at the lions, but when he sees they just kind of stretch and lay back down in their cage, he stops and says, "Nah, it's not worth it. Wouldn't be honorable." But the guys in the caravan are actually, like, very fucking impressed. They're like, "Fuck, that was really dangerous regardless. Like, that took some serious fucking balls."
Or stupidity.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that they know the difference, probably. And with this...
I'm familiar with that line.
Yeah. Don Quixote names himself the Knight of the Lions. And of course, the second part of Don Quixote is much like the first. Our hero and Sancho get into adventures and listen to tales from people at various inns and campfires.
Wait, second or third?
This is the second part of it. I'm just mean like we've been talking about it for a little bit, but it's just I'm just saying like it's still very episodic. What are typically seen as the most famous tales from the second part is when Don Quixote believes there's a cave of wonders in this hole in the ground, and Sancho lowers him down. And after a while, Sancho brings him back up to find that he's asleep. But of course, Don Quixote claims that he was actually in a crystal kingdom for like 3 days. The other famous tale is much like when Don Quixote tilts at the windmills, when he sees a puppet show about knights and he gets really into it and attacks the puppeteer. Either way, eventually our crew comes upon a duke and duchess.
I've seen through your mirage. What the fuck, man? This is for 8-year-olds. Charlatan!
They come upon a duke and duchess hunting in the woods. And believe it or not, they recognize Don Quixote and Sancho instantly. Turns out they've read the first book and are huge fans. So they invite the two back to their castle for dinner.
So where's the donkey?
My name is Don Quixote. They invite the two back to the castle for dinner, and they're just total dicks to them. They have their servants give them a bath and they pretend that they ran out of water, so they'll have to have dinner with suds all over them. And then later, they wash it off with dirty dishwater, like shit like that. They're just being assholes for fun because they know that they're morons, you know? In fact, the Duke and Duchess invite the two out for a boar hunt, and wouldn't you know it, there's a vision of wizards and an enchanted Dulcinea that just happens across their party, and Dulcinea says the only way to make her enchantment go away is if Sancho whips his own ass 3,300 times and likes it. So, yeah, these guys just spend massive amounts of wealth to torture our two heroes. Like, and it comes out throughout, like, the fucking book, too, where he's like, you know, Sancho, you really ought to start whipping yourself. It's going to take a while to get to that 3,300. And he's just like, yeah, but I have to fucking like it. And right now, I don't fucking want to, you know. Well, at one point...
Also, you must consent.
Well, yeah, that was...
Jesus!
I don't get down like that. Well, at one point, the Duke and Duchess send Don Quixote and Sancho on these ridiculous quests, and they eventually reward Sancho with his own island, because, you know, they know he was promised one from the first book. However, it's evident that Sancho Panza doesn't actually know what an island is. So when Sancho Panza is taken away from Don Quixote, they just put him in the middle of this little landlocked village on the Duke and Duchess's land. And of course, the whole village is in on the joke. So every day, people come to Sancho for governing duties, like judging cases, being the parishioner for marrying off odd couples, things like that. And it's all just for everyone's amusement. But the thing is, by the time Sancho leaves town, believing himself not smart enough to govern an island, he actually manages to pass several laws that are kind of beneficial to people, like lowering the cost of shoes, which tend to quickly wear out while they're working, or being able to sell wine regardless of its origin, which was a law at the time. You could only sell Spanish wine. And as Sancho leaves the village after just a week of being there, the people are like, shit, that was a bummer. He actually kind of did okay. Once Sancho meets back up with Don Quixote at the Duke and Duchess's palace, they realize they're better suited for the road, and they ride off to Barcelona. Once they get there, they see that the people in the streets are well aware of their infamy. They're just really excited to see these legendary dumbasses, while Don Quixote and Sancho believe they're getting treated like royalty. Well, eventually another knight shows up, challenging Don Quixote to a duel. This knight, the Knight of the White Moon, says that if he defeats Don Quixote, he must return home and stay there for a whole year. Pumped up by the crowd.
Only 1 year?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I guess as a knight, it's
these
just
guys
like...
have just random outbursts and accomplish quite a bit in just like a week or two. I mean, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the requests are always like something really weird with people who say that they're knights, you know, like, and if I win, you have to say Dulcinea is only second best. Like, fuck, you know, like they're just, I don't know, they're eccentric, I guess.
Is it an actual knight this time? Do we not know yet?
We don't know. Well, Don Quixote accepts. The fight is on. and Don Quixote loses pretty fast. Remember, he's won like one fight so far, but honorable man that he is, Don Quixote honors the conditions of his defeat. As the people watch him and Sancho right away, the crowd asks the Knight of the White Moon who he is, and it's just Samson again.
Bitch ain't gonna get me twice.
Ain't gonna dick twist me a second time, you son of a bitch. Well, when our two heroes get back home, Don Quixote comes down with a terrible illness. After 7 days of bed rest, he comes to, claiming his name is not that of the fictional Don Quixote, but Alonso Quijano. His fever burned away his craziness. He's gained back his sanity. But the barber, the priest, and Samson have all found a common thrill in Don Quixote's adventures over the last few weeks, and it turns out they really miss messing with him after all. They tried to tell him, no, your name's not Alonso, it's Don Quixote de la Mancha.
Okay, that's gaslight.
Yeah. They're like, hurry up and get better so you can ride out again. But instead, Alonso Quijano, in his final moments, renounces the life of a knight errant and leaves everything he owns to his niece and to Sancho before passing away. Sancho is not there for his death. He's busy seeing a fully furnished kitchen for the first time and eating everything he can. The second part of Don Quixote ends with Cervantes saying that he was born to write about Don Quixote, and as Don Quixote has died, he feels that soon, so will he. Cervantes lived in Madrid until his death on April 22nd, 1616, at the age of 68, just a year after the second part of Don Quixote released. Apparently, he had an issue with some sort of unquenchable thirst, leading some to believe that he possibly died from diabetes. It could have also just been those two gaping fucking shot wounds in his chest, like, I don't know,
Not
spiraling
really
out. And
healing.
yeah. They just fucking merge together and create one huge gap.
You should
now.
really go see a barber about that.
He was buried at the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians, the religious group he joined in his later life, the same ones who also paid for his ransom, until 1673 when the building was being refurbished. During this time, the Trinitarians moved his body elsewhere, among many others buried in the building, to a different location for safekeeping. But afterwards, when they were moving the bodies back, someone at the convent asked, "Hey, where's the body of Miguel de Cervantes?" They were just like, "Who?" Don Quixote remains seen as one of the greatest novels ever written. It is celebrated in Spain like no other. Spanish is even referred to as the language of Cervantes, culturally, and Sigmund Freud even learned Spanish just so that he could read Don Quixote in its natural language. And although Cervantes was for sure an accomplished writer in other rights, the sheer stardom that Don Quixote holds will shadow his and any of his other contemporaries' works. For instance, just 3 days before his death, Cervantes managed to complete his last novel, The Travails of Persiles and Sigismunda, and apparently it's very, very good, but nobody cares because it's not Don Quixote. Since its initial release, the ingenious gentleman Don Quixote de la Mancha has been translated well over 1,000 times by numerous translators in all different languages. The best one goes to Edith Grossman. Her 2003 edition is apparently a slam dunk on getting all the humor right and everything that a lot of people found so easy to lose in translation. The worst translation goes to the 1687 translation by John Phillips, who is actually Paradise Lost author John Milton's nephew. He apparently had a bit of trouble translating the Spanish since he didn't actually speak it. So there are parts of the book he fully made up, and wanting the book to be more relatable to the English, completely changed the locations in the book to be places like London.
What are your qualifications for translating this into Spanish? I really need the money.
C. Oh, wow. Although Don Quixote...
Poppy?
Father, daddy, shit, Poppy, yes, Poppy, C, Poppy. Although Don Quixote himself is, quote, the man from La Mancha, La Mancha is a region in Spain, not a town, so everyone was wondering where he was from. Sometime in the 2000s, some scholars figured out that Don Quixote was probably from a town called Villanueva de los Infantes, because that place is fucking miserable and always historically has been, I guess.
Still?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, pretty much like when I was looking it up, like La Mancha is known as a region of Spain known for its mud. And yet from all of this...
Real slippery.
From all of this, we have no idea what Miguel de Cervantes looked like. There were paintings done of famous men, and even not so famous men back then, as getting a portrait done and having it hung in your home was as essential as having a vacuum cleaner or a set of dishes back then. However, although Cervantes did commission a portrait at one point, it has since been lost. And he did want an engraving of himself on the cover of exemplary novels to kind of immortalize himself, but the publisher thought
Jesus Christ, that's so fucking expensive.
Well, it's just a picture, you know? Like, I don't know.
No, back then it's no such thing as just a picture. You said engraving, by the way. You don't engrave a fucking picture.
No,
that implies that there's some leather-bound shit.
You engrave a stone print or something, you cover it all up in ink, and then you start slapping it down on cover pages and shit. They all had, like, a picture. But basically the publisher thought it was stupid to just put them on there, so they just didn't do it. So instead, the beginning of the book says, quote, "This person whom you see here, with an oval visage, chestnut hair, smooth open forehead, lively eyes, a hooked but well-proportioned nose, and silvery beard that 20 years ago was golden, large mustache, small mouth, teeth not much to speak of, for he has only 6, in bad condition and worse placed, no two of them corresponding each other, a figure midway between the two extremes, neither tall nor short, of a vivid complexion, rather fair than dark, somewhat stooped in the shoulder and not very light-footed." You just went for it. Anyway,
Does it go on?
No. Most of the images you see of Cervantes today are based on a portrait that the painter later admitted was just made up. Since 1970...
Just fuck me up.
I mean, fuck it, whatever. Like, who cares? Since 1976, the Miguel de Cervantes Prize is awarded to that year's greatest Spanish-speaking writer, with a prize of 125,000 euros. His body remained missing until 2015. But hey, they fucking found him. There he was, just a skeleton with 6 fucking teeth and a couple bullet holes in his chest, with the letters MC inscribed on the coffin. And I think Spain reburied him at the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians, but they plan on making a big ol' thing for him in there. My sources today, and for last episode: Don Quixote by Cervantes, translated by John Rutherford, Penguin Books, 2003. Spain finds Don Quixote writer Cervantes' tomb in Madrid by Camila Ruz, March 17th, 2015, bbc.com, cervantes.dh.tamu.edu, and Wikipedia. Without this man, we wouldn't have just... the Three Stooges, or Buster Keaton, or maybe Jackie Chan for that matter. And so, you know what? God bless him.
So, I mean, he wanted to be a writer and was, like, trying to put stuff down before he, like, got involved in.
Before he just got mad and said, fuck it, I guess you all suck. Go die.
No, before he went into the military, and then after the military got, like, imprisoned and ransomed and then stuck in a fucking... After his family said they weren't going to fucking, like, take it back. So, I mean, he was fucking miserable.
Yeah, actually, you know what? You bring up a good point. Good for him for seeing the silver lining there and creating comedy from his miserable fucking existence.
No, I feel like what happened there is, like, he wasn't... Something wasn't quite taking what he wanted to do, like, creatively, and then as the coping mechanism that he had through all that shit...
And then they sucked each other's dicks, and then they pooped on each other's heads. I mean, yeah. If
like, wow, this guy's really funny. He's like, you have no idea what it took to get him to snap into this space.
Yeah, he just has never smiled.
Yeah, he's really good at getting funny. I'm assuming that's what got him through everything.
He just, instead of, like, stroking his mustache and beard, he just kind of, just fucking fingers one of the bullet holes in his fucking side, just,
No,
yes.
Probably just has his hand on a little towel, and then whenever one of them kind of gives, he just kind of, oh, shit, wipes it out.
Oh, God, that's disgusting.
You know he's not getting laid. That must hurt, too.
Well, he had,
you got money, then it doesn't count as getting laid if you have to pay somebody. I mean, it's
No,
sex,
he
but
got
you're not-
money for marrying that one girl.
Oh,
He
yeah.
gets the dowry because he's a man, and that's what man should get is a dowry. You know, like,
Yeah.
hey, you ought to thank
Hey.
me. You ought to thank me.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I see no problem here.
You ought to thank me from taking your 19-year-old daughter when I'm just a crippled, weird-looking motherfucker.
Well, I mean, he was like painting himself as like a tax collector, right?
True. Yeah, he was also
Is that
skimming
even
money.
yeah. Anyway,
Tax collector? Is it a real occupation? It is. It shouldn't be. But anyway.
well,
You want to play Red Dead?
god damn, I don't. No, I don't.
You don't have the energy in you to get past the snow part, do you?
Dude, I don't. I fucking don't. I don't have
No
the
one ever
energy in me
does.
to get past the snow part and then to get past the whole beginning. I just want all the. I just want the option there to skip everything and just get all the mechanics to just go run around and shoot deer.
Well, there's a deer over there. How about you raise your rifle and shoot it? Now, hold on a moment there. First, let me show you how to get into Deadeye. And also, I want to let you know how to fill your Deadeye. And
no, Jordan, no. How to activate tracking mode, sir?
God damn
If you're
it.
gonna clown on it, at least play it a little bit. All right.
I don't want to. Snow part's boring.
Yeah, it's rough. It is rough.
I bought that thing years ago. I've never played it.
It took me like 3 tries to actually get there. This is so off goddamn topic.
Well, hey, see you later. I guess.
No,
I don't know.
no. Would we like to tell anyone to do anything or thank anyone?
Yeah, support your local sex worker.
Oh,
Thanks, Bangladesh.
yeah. Yep.
For
That's the 2.
those are the 2 things.
Yep.
We're just gonna thank Bangladesh every episode.
Yeah, I mean that's the majority of the listeners. So
Thanks, Bangladesh.